Hello, welcome to the channel. I'm Doruk, and this is a reaction to the Half-Life 25th anniversary documentary that Valve put out on YouTube like a year or two ago. If you're new to the channel, I've been playing through the Half-Life games. I've been having so much fun. Just finished up Alex. Really kind of like an amazing experience. I encourage you to check out the playthroughs if you haven't. And a lot of commenters told me to react to the documentary, so here we are. I'm not much of a reactor. Okay, I'm not going to go like, oh my god, that's my goat, Gabe Newell or something. I'm just going to be making some commentary as we watch a documentary. So it might be a bit dry. I don't know. You guys wanted to see it. So here we are, and let's get started. Okay.
You just go over the mountains over here, and you're in high desert.
Yeah, there's like Utah, I guess.
And it's high desert. So I spent a lot of time out there getting reference. Most of the reference came from Eastern Washington.
Never mind, Washington.
I did a drive out to the Columbia Gorge and took a lot of photos, and also a lot of...
Because Black Mesa was in Utah,
imagery.
right?
Just like, hey, this is what desert looks like, and big cliffs and stuff like that. That drive was 2 days. It was 8 hours down, 8 hours back, and I'm not even sure I spent the night. I did. I must have spent the night down there. So while it was definitely made for the Southwest, the local reference was out.
Oh, interesting.
Good morning and welcome.
And she like drove out there to take pictures and stuff. Yeah, New Mexico. Okay, not Utah.
Security and convenience of the Black Mesa Research Facility personnel.
I think 26 years, which is insane. 1998. Wow. Yeah, so they had to get the original development team. That's awesome. It wasn't a big team. It was like 20, 30 people, right? Chapter 1. Valve. Wow.
My name is Mike Harrington. I was co-founder at Valve. I wasn't really used to big companies. When I started at Microsoft, it wasn't that big. It was like 1,500 people, like a big high school. 9 years later, it was significantly bigger. I'm thinking, oh, this place is too big. And that was still like 1996, so they had a long ways to go. I told my managers like a year before, like, I'm leaving in a year, and I'm going to start a game company. And the first person I talked to was a good friend of mine, Michael Abrash. But at that time, he was trying to do something within Microsoft, and by the time it made sense.
This is Doom, right? Or Quake? Doom or Quake? I don't know.
So how could he say no to that? And then I was having lunch with Gabe, and I said, Gabe, I'm leaving. I'm just going to leave, and I'm going to start a game company.
That's my goal.
I want to start a game company. All right, and that was it.
On the surface, we should have failed. And realistically, both Mike and I thought we would get about a year into it, realize we'd made horrible mistakes, and go back to our friends at Microsoft and ask for our job.
Hold on. This dude is like worth billions of dollars, and he's wearing like some Nike glass frames. Which is like, obviously I'm not judging him for it, but I just think that's hilarious because that's got to be like a cheap ass glass. Like, if you wear glasses, guys, frames get really expensive. I think that's hilarious. Just some Nike glass frames, all good.
Back. But we did think that we knew a fair bit about software development, that there were expertise that goes into it. I think we also had some pretty clear ideas of how to design a company, right? So when we were building Half-Life, we were also designing Valve at the same time.
That makes sense.
We had no plan except for, by then, like I mentioned, Michael had gone to id. And he said, oh, you're starting a game company, you have to use our engine. So Gabe and I flew down to Mesquite to meet id. We spent a good deal of time with John Romero, and he told us, like, this is what you need to do to start a game company. You need to go out and hire some level designers and do that kind of thing. And we kind of understood the engineering part. And then because we were Michael's friends, we walked away with the source code to Quake that day. We had
so that was Quake.
We had kind of an idea of what it could be, and they just gave us a CD, and we had kind of the crown jewels of id, and that game on.
Dude, that's cool. it's so much more bare bones back then, right? Here's just a disc of like the Quake engine.
No game development experience. We were either amateurs working in our homes at night for fun, or some people were from the software world, but they had never worked on a game. I think we had 3 or 4 people in the entire company who had actually shipped a game when we started Half-Life. We have to figure out what is Valve's first game. So we have to come up with an IP. So everything is done from scratch.
Gabe came into the office and he said, I read this story. I read this Stephen King story called The Mist. You know, Stephen King, it's got monsters, you know, people in a grocery store, fog comes in, monsters in the fog, you know, use your imagination. We didn't want to write that as a game. That wasn't really the point, but it was just the tension and, you know, how it felt.
Well, it was interesting. At first, we had 2 games. Greg was working Prospero, and then Half-Life was originally called Quiver.
Prospero, Quiver.
Then build a team and
Coomer.
figure out another game for us to build. That'll be the second game Valve ships. What features should it have? How is it going to be different from a normal first-person shooter?
Every time the engine got a feature for Prospero, Half-Life stole it. And then Half-Life just started getting visually, you know, more impressive and cooler. And eventually it just, because it was going to ship sooner, it just stole the resources from Prospero, and Prospero just faded away.
Okay.
This character had a
Interesting.
floating orb, and it wanted to have some, you know, effects on it. It's kind of magical energy, something. And so I worked with them on that and came up with the first version of the beam effects, and you know, they were using it, they were happy with it, and then people on Half-Life are coming over and like, what is that? How did you do that? So very quickly that got into
Dude,
Half-Life.
that's
The
cool.
disaster sequence has kind of beam effects all over it, and we ended up using it for the Vortigons.
Oh God, no.
Like there were a bunch of things that we were doing that we thought would help us tackle the problem of what video games were. And what video games were a rapidly changing field where at the time 90% of video games failed to turn a profit. And a few percentage of them were very, very profitable, right? So it was a field that really valued talent.
You know, like I said, Gabe and I brought some people, and then, you know, from there on out, we had to hire people. And, you know, Romero said you got to hire level designers. So, you know, we found some people who had industry experience.
Makes sense.
The Triad first as a pixel artist, and then went with Duke Nukem, and then everything just went nuts. But I was sitting in my office one day, and my phone rang, just out of the blue, and I pick it up, and it's this recruiter. Eventually, he hooked me up with Gabe, and they flew me up here. It was a big surprise.
But then we started looking, you know, the nice thing that we had is we had a whole bunch of people in the world who had been working on mods, and so we could start looking at those folks. And that's where we hired a lot of our designers.
Steve and Guthrie, Steve Bond, John Guthrie were my favorite hires by far.
I just want to briefly talk about that because, like, I really think that people that mod games, or even not necessarily mod them to make their own, like, game, but people that either, you know, for example, Silent Hill 2 has, like, a very devoted, like, fan, not remake, but essentially, like, you know, like quality of life like version that can run on modern systems and has all these like improvements. And like people that do that, I think are so incredible. Like being able to like, you know, it's in a way some sort of like almost a fan fiction if you try to create your own story off of it, but it's so cool that people are like able to just mod a game. I've never really been super interested in it myself, but I just think it's like, I think I remember I used to play like custom mods of Age of Empires 2. And I just remember being like, wow, there's a community of people that just like a game so much they want to kind of make their own thing within the game. I thought it was really cool. In a way, it is like the video game form of a fan fiction. But then I also think the people that like maintain games so that they can still be played to this day are also like, again, like some of the coolest people, right? It's really interesting. Anyway, sorry. I'm going to probably pause to give my thoughts a lot throughout this video.
Other than Doug, Gabe sent them an email and they're like, who is this scammer? You know, never heard of these guys. Just kids, like barely 20, I swear. And they show up and they're just the most creative, brilliant,
Clever.
fucking clever. Steve had the magic ability to make stuff fun.
The fact that those guys have been hired to go work on some
That's Mark
game
Laidlaw,
with
the
some
writer.
company, I think that was the start for a lot of people that something cool was going to happen, because those guys were already doing stuff that was cool.
And then Mark showed up, and like Mark actually knows how stories work, you know, beginning, middle, end, and all this stuff, and he had all sorts of great ideas, and he also would just, you know, bring good ideas out of everybody else as well.
Like the person who wrote more code on Half-Life was a chemistry major who decided to be an IP lawyer in Atlanta, right? And he ended up writing more code than anybody else. Or the creature designer for most of the AI for the creatures in the game was a manager at a Waffle House. It's not like there are a bunch of people that you could say, oh, this person, you know, has a PhD
Makes
in video
sense.
game design. It was that combination of both finding those people when it wasn't necessarily easy to find them at that stage in the video game industry, and then also convincing them that it was a better place to work than anybody else.
So Quiver turned into Half-Life. I wonder if they're like going for a more medieval-esque kind of thing. Like it seems that yeah, modified greatly, obviously. The Source engine, I think, right? Okay, let me just, yeah, so because they had that Prospero game, which seems more like a fantasy thing, and I wonder if they were originally going with like two kind of fantasy elements with these two games, and then it's slowly turned into this sci-fi, or maybe quickly turned into this sci-fi element. I'm not sure. That's super interesting. And again, I think the idea, well, not the idea, but like the fact that, you know, they brought in these people from like all these different backgrounds, because again, it was like the early days of game development. And like you get people that, for example, like, yeah, some chemistry major writes the most code, or the person that created the AI for these monsters, which ends up being like really good AI for a game from 98, like AI that can match kind of some elements of AI even in modern games. And it's just some random kid at a Waffle House, you know, manager at a Waffle House, maybe not a kid, is great. And I also think it makes sense in a way, because I think they're the ones that are kind of establishing that kind of like foundation or that baseline. And then as people become more educated and there becomes more of like a routine or like a curriculum on how to become a game developer, that becomes like the map, like the roadmap or the plan or like the framework for how someone should create AI. And also because of that, there isn't like a framework of how efficient can we make this? Like, what are the checks, like the boxes that we need to check off for AI to be good? Back then, it could just be like, okay, we just got to make it feel as realistic as possible. But then, you know, in 10 years, when it's optimized, people are saying like, okay, it doesn't actually need to be as realistic. We just have to make sure it checks these boxes and that's it. It doesn't need to be fully fleshed out, because most people won't appreciate like that additional like 30-40% of effort you're putting in. So that, again, it's one of those things where I think you can only really get this like level of like this wide breadth almost of like really interesting ideas or concepts, because there isn't that curriculum, there isn't that like understanding of what makes something good. So they try their best to just do everything as well as they can. Again, I don't know if that made sense as I explained it, but really interesting to think about, considering how I think a lot of people would agree that gameplay has been fairly stagnant over the last maybe decade or so, particularly amongst AAA games. Obviously, I think there's so many amazing games that have been released by indie developers in the last decade. Most of my favorite games are from those, you know, like in the last 5 or 10 years. But in terms of like actual gameplay elements, I don't think there's been anything particularly revolutionary in the last decade for like how a game could be potentially played, right? So again, that's just an aside, something that I've just thought of.
One of the things that I definitely learned was how to hire engineers. And you know, we needed some engineers.
For us anyway, we had licensed ID's engine, you know, we're using the Quake engine. And one of the things me and some of the other engineers, probably Ken, were talking about was if it would be possible to use the save system to kind of like join our levels together in a really seamless way. So you get to the end of a level, save stuff, and then load some of it on the next level, and have it just feel like, you know, the world.
And that must have been a unique idea.
Like every once in a while, a hallway or the train would get to a point and you would have a little stop for the level to transition. And so he wrote that code leveraged on top of just the save load code to do the transitions. And I think in Half-Life 1 we got most of the
Wow, look at the alpha head crab.
You know, I remember when we went from 8-bit to 16-bit, like, hey, we don't have to have all our textures fit in a certain, 256 colors. That was a huge liberation.
That's crazy.
The two tech investments we made for Half-Life was to get to 16-bit color.
Oh my God, so many colors
for all the monsters.
But at the time, it was
most fluid and intricate movement.
It's like a text file of vertex positions over time.
I wanted so much more animation, and I wanted the animators to have the freedom to put in 100, 200, 500 frame of animation, if not more. And then you can do all sorts of other things because you have a skeleton, so it's like, oh, I can hook on a gun to a character. I can start to make changes of characters and replay the same animation or reuse most of the same model. So it can
and yeah, that was like revolutionary at the time. That's crazy.
Like all the technology that went into the game to make it as fun as it is was not available one generation
and now
before.
it's like a staple, right?
So licensing the Quake engine, which was very mature and had level designers who'd grown up just goofing around with it.
I wasn't heavily into scripting since back into Doom. Like my old Doom levels have a lot of weird odd events in them. I think I asked Ken, is it possible that I could have access to the character's animation, like a trigger? Like what I mentioned, I could make the guys go into an animation, I could make them run, and then I would configure everything. It was all hack. This is total hacky stuff. And that is mostly what I built, was like things like characters reacting and jumping out are made to look like, or I'd use a push brush to throw a head crab out to make it look like it launched at something.
Or if a loud sound happened,
they would respond,
would cower.
Gabe's dictate was, as you walked forward, something needs to happen like every 3 to 5 seconds.
Yeah.
The player stands still, the
didn't have to be much.
universe can be quiet. But if they move forward, if they're active, the universe needs to play something, needs to do something, even if it is a scripted sequence or
even just an interesting sign or
a sound or some vignette.
Super interesting, okay.
So I came up with this interaction method where you could do little AIs where the characters would talk and interact with you a little bit. And then we wanted to do spectacle, and that was scripted sequences where you could tell a character, you need to run here and then jump into this animation. And then have a bunch of you all synchronize your animation.
Oh my God.
Somebody's flying through the air,
we didn't see this.
Something, they're doing something like that.
Yeah, and then test it and figure out like, oh, this is real easy to break. That was the roughest thing about scripted sequences.
I imagine.
You'd have like a head crab jumping on a scientist or something, and it's like, yeah, it works totally fine 90% of the time, but some people just sprint right at the scientist, and sometimes we have to put them behind glass. And
sometimes the level designers
I remember that.
Making the player want to do the thing that gives them the most fun is a very subtle art.
The tentacle sequence is probably the one I remember the most.
You're playing it, right? That was the first time I think they melded together.
Because you had your trigger
so closely,
and we wanted it to be triggered. So by the time you start to see it, you see the scientist flying through the air and hitting the wall. Then you could look in and you could see the scientist being carried away. The tentacle itself is separate; it's on its own, and you bring the two together, mesh them together, and boom.
It felt so seamless though, and that for me was like moments like that, and that might have been the first one, is when you start to see the scripted events and play start to blend a little bit more than just ambience.
For God's sake, open the silo door! They're coming for us! It's our
I remember Brett in particular.
Oh, this game was so funny.
Would walk from one area to another and just look at a monitor, and it gave them a little bit of life. A ton of the work that went into that area was because we knew it was going to be the beginning of the game, and we really needed to make it a vibrant and interesting, fun place to be and explore.
So originally they were designed to sort of be behind glass. They were just designed to be spectacle.
Yeah, a little vignette.
And then all of the level designers like, no, I'm gonna put that right in front of you. And I'm like, oh God, how am I supposed to make this work? It's not supposed to do it.
Get away from there, Freeman. I'm expecting an important message.
The run speed for the player was so
It's
insane.
yeah, you're so fast.
It was like what, 25 miles an
You
hour.
go so fast in Half-Life.
You could get so far, so fast, and so you'd either have to make the scripted sequence like so quick that you could barely see what's happening. Most people weren't looking in the right place anyway, so you know, you'd have to like get their attention with like a particle or a sound or lighting or something, and then you wanted them to see what was happening. But when we play tested, and it's like a scientist was like being pulled into a vent or something, like people wouldn't just stop and like, oh, sometimes they would be like, oh wow, look at that. They just run straight ahead and just start shooting.
It's hard when you think back to it to recognize that those kind of interactive moments were so new. Like people just hadn't seen them.
It was worth it because no other games were doing that. No other games had that interactivity. No other games had that spectacle playing out in front of you. And it just added that whole feel of Half-Life.
Honestly, a lot of games don't even do it now.
Gabe had started to develop this theory around interactivity, and the environment needed to let you do what you wanted and then react to it. So if you did something, if you shot your gun, there needed to be a bullet hole in the wall. If you did a thing, people needed, other characters needed to react. The world is acknowledging you exist. The world is acknowledging all of your actions. And that's this huge part of reinforcement.
And you'd have these conversations where you'd be sitting in a design review and somebody'd say, that's not realistic. And you're like, okay, what does that have to, like, explain to me why that's interesting, because in the real world, I have to write up lists of stuff I have to go to the grocery store to buy. And I've never thought to myself that realism is fun. I go play games to have fun. And so we had to come up with some notion of what fun was. We knew it was an ad hoc definition, and it was the degrees to which the game recognizes and responded to the player's choices and actions, right? In behavioral science, you would say we were explicitly talking about what were reinforcers and what the reinforcement schedules were, right? At that point in time, that was a useful way of making design decisions.
Wow. Dude, this is fascinating.
The point I would make is, if I go up to a wall and shoot it, to me, it feels like the wall is ignoring me. I'm getting a narcissistic injury when the world is ignoring me. So it is to me, I was trying to convey to the user a sense of, yes, you were making choices, yes, you were progressing, which meant the game had to acknowledge that back to you. If you shoot at a wall, there have to be decals. If you kill a bunch of Marines, the Marines have to run away from you, right? You have to have this sense of the game acknowledging and responding to the choices and actions and progressions that you've made. Otherwise, it loses any sort of impact.
Damn, dude. Wow. That's so interesting. I really think like the idea of every 3 to 5 seconds, there needs to just be something, right? It doesn't have to be big, but there needs to be a sign, maybe a scripted sequence, maybe like an ammo or weapon pickup, something to make it so that everything feels in a way like new or intentional. And I think, again, what we saw in Half-Life was like, if you compare it to a modern game, obviously you're going to be like, wow, it's lacking in a lot of things. But taking into context that how old of a game it is, the fact that it already does, that it did things that games like have to do now, right? Like it did set the standard. There's fairly like good AI. Like I have played a lot of modern shooters, just don't have AI, like have pretty much similar AI to Half-Life, frankly. Maybe even worse in some ways. And obviously there's plenty of better AI examples too. But again, you have to take into context how old of the game it was. But I really find it interesting that like, and again, it's why the Half-Life games are so engaging, is that there isn't really any dead space. Like, not the game. dead time or anything. Like every movement, even when you move forward through a hallway, there's something there, right? There's a new sign, there's a lever, there's always some way you can interact with it. So it keeps you engaged at all times. And on top of that, I think the also the fact that there's again, like the balance, this isn't as this isn't as mind-blowing to me as like what Gabe said about the 3 to 5 seconds thing. But again, like that idea of, okay, how do we make something fun, even if it's not realistic? Obviously there's the balance, right? Like you can't like have a gun shoot out like bubble gum unless it's like intended to do that, right? But it's you have to find that mix of like where, you know, if I shoot something, there's like some kind of feedback, or if I do this thing, even if it's not realistic, it's fun and it's somewhat intuitive. And I, again, like they were really thinking about that back then, and even like the elements of reactivity that just wasn't there. And you know, you look back at Quake or like Doom or something, and it's like, again, it's like these like sprites that just go like bah, bah, and then they shoot you, and then that's it. But like having these models interact and live, like again, when you first get introduced to Black Mesa and they're all doing different things, again, maybe now it's not that impressive, but like you have to think, this was 25 years ago. I doubt there was any scientists, you know, taking a dump or something in the bathroom and then telling you to go away or whatever it was. So, man, okay. This is a very fascinating documentary. Monster problems.
We were on the same page in terms of what the game should look like, which would be just sort of alien in a very naturalistic kind of way. Like these are creatures from another dimension, another planet that look like they evolved in a way, and Chuck had he came from Duke Nukem. He made a bunch of monsters.
Never played the Duke Nukem games.
Went in a sort of a different direction, and for a while the game had a hard time coalescing around a single vision.
All the ones that looked like genitals were Ted's. And all the ones with shiny bits that looked like alien soldiers were Chuck's.
That was
what are you
thing
doing?
When I first came in, Ted's style and mine.
And trying to figure that out.
Trying to find the harmony between the two to make it work.
Yeah.
Ted he really liked the Wayne Barlow aesthetic, and I had a little bit different, but it worked. Ted made these really weird. He did the head crab.
I like the original design. Give me a second. I need to.
And I remember.
Wait, the original design looks super cool.
No, that Ted made these really weird.
Look at that. I actually like the bigger kind of like design. Maybe that's just me, but I actually really like this original concept. I like the bigger.
The head crab, you know, that's pretty much the symbol of it all. And I remember taking his head crab and putting it on a scientist and making the zombie. Right. Well, we pretty much we talked, and it's like, okay, you do that, and Ted did the soldiers, I did the scientists, I did a lot of the aliens, and with the Hornet gun, I did the Hornet gun for that one as well too. You know, the alien slave. Well, I did some animations for the bull squid or bull chicken. I have to call him that.
Bull chicken.
That's a Ted creature there. The hound eye was Ted's as well.
Yeah, a lot of the fleshy. If it's got a lot of flesh on it, maybe too much.
Yeah, that's a Tedism.
You can always tell Ted's designs because they're much more aquarium than aquarium and/or like Unspeakables.
Big Mama.
Oh, Big Mama!
There we go.
I forgot about Big Mama. Oh God! You know, it's a testicle, right? It's like
so disturbed.
I concepted a guy in sort of a NASA spacesuit, a scientist guy. He was actually modeled after a couple of programmers I know. Big, beefy, bearded.
Yeah, I told you, Gordon Freeman looks like you're like a software engineer or like a program project manager or something.
Be the guy. And then Chuck Jones went off and did a pretty different version of him that became known as Ivan the Space Biker.
Oh God. I remember telling myself,
Space
Biker.
Biker.
Make a screenshot. Make sure it's good, because you don't know where this is going to appear again.
We didn't know that.
And Ivan is prime example of that one. So, you know, you're looking at, well, go look at Quake. It's like, okay, I'm looking at that, and he's got this incredibly boxy head. And you're always saying,
Oh,
don't
man.
put too many polys in it. And it's like, okay, so Ivan got the square head. And it was kind of an early, just a rough prototype of a Gordon Freeman baby. And I remember we didn't know what Gordon looked like. So it's like I was looking for somebody, and I found Mike Harrington. It's like, Mike, what does Gordon look like? I don't know. Put yourself in there. Oh, okay. And so I went in and put kind of my likeness on the early Gordon model in the game. And it kind of stayed there.
Did you have a ponytail?
Well, I was ex-tattoo artist, so yeah, I definitely had. I don't have anything to work with now, but yeah, that.
I feel you, dude. Don't worry.
You know that it's Chuck. If you play multiplayer and you see the model, it's.
But yeah, if you look on the back of that, there's this little like four triangles, and he's.
Oh, he's got a little ponytail. I didn't even know that.
I did the G-Man, and again, that one was Gabe was talking about the Cigarette Man from X-Files. So
I don't know what that. Hold on, I gotta look that up. I gotta look that up. Okay. I mean, just a dude in a suit with a cigarette, but I guess he's supposed to be scary or something. I'm not really. I don't know. Does it really make me think G-Man?
Playing with the game for a long time, people realized like, hey, we made this character, and just in this one office scene in the beginning, you know, where he's behind the window and he's talking to a scientist or something, and he's like, he looks really creepy. It was late in the day that we thought, oh, okay, well, he's going to be the big bad behind all of this. Like, scatter him around in places that you can't get to him.
Wow, so that's how they
But he's
decided.
there
That's crazy.
Mysteriously.
There wasn't enough in the beginning of the game. It's like, we need another monster. Head crabs weren't enough. It got kind of repetitious. I think I grabbed.
It gets repetitious even in the base, like normally.
I need them to do this and
I can't
this.
imagine what it was
And
like
so he
before.
worked it out in not much time at all. I'm gonna get the timing just right, and I have no time to do this. So I'm just gonna bang it out. And then once it was working, everybody said, "Oh, let's go back and sprinkle them back in
The Vortigons,
the
okay.
maps." And that was this.
Because we introduced them a little earlier than we
Yeah,
were planning.
yeah, because they ended up being they weren't real tough. They weren't supposed to be tough.
But they were ranged.
But they're ranged.
They one-shot you almost in fucking hard
and,
mode.
like, that was showing off a bunch of stuff.
These guys were nightmares.
I remember the assassin came in pretty late.
That was it. It was like, okay, I have a week and a half. It was already done. It was already all modeled, already all animated, and the requirement was it couldn't have any new animations and any new anything. So had to come up. I grabbed a bunch of Steve Bond's AI and banged that thing out. I built a level, super crude, but it had all the right spacing and all the right heights and all the right geometry.
Again, it's just a presentation where this creature gets to shine.
The assassin segments were hard, but they were really good.
Entire focus for that scene, and it's kind of a memorable experience.
Yeah.
It just takes place in a different fashion than
Absolutely.
Happens, and you get knocked out,
Absolutely.
and there's all kinds of the lights go out, and you get dragged through a corridor and things. So, again, it's something you remember in the game. We just did a lot of playtesting and did a lot of level building and used all of the monsters and you used everything that we had developed and started seeing which ones kind of stuck out a little oddly. Like we had the hound eyes that Ted had concepted.
Wow, that UI is awful in the bottom left.
They seemed like a very oddly plausible sort of alien creature, and Chuck did what we
Ooh,
call
I
the
like
Panther
this
Eye,
design too.
which was this big black panther.
Wait, dude, I really like this thing's
creature that
design.
Also, just had a big red eye for his face, and a big shark fin coming out the back. And design-wise, he
That's
seemed
sick.
like this is a very useful creature. It's like when you design things, you like to have a gradient of difficulty, a gradient of escalation and threat. And so if we had these hound eyes, then oh yes, this panther, bigger,
Yeah, I was about to
scarier
say.
looking thing would be more of a threat. It was in the game for a long time, and then sort of just worked its way out because folks couldn't find a way to incorporate a creature like that into the environment and make it seem reasonable.
The Stuka bat was, it was something
Wait, that's also
just a weird, another creature from the air. We had the chub toad that we were going to use as a feeding animal to help, and yeah, they had a mechanic to where they were going to use this to distract monsters so you could possibly get by, and it pretty much reached fruition to where we created the object, but then again, time became the factor. And
dude, that's so sad. One person.
I grew up just outside DC, and so
Karen
there's all
Lahr,
these,
yeah.
big, really banal office buildings, and that's kind of the direction I went. So it started becoming a facility. And so I started making these kind of linoleum tiles and the drop ceiling, the concrete block wall, the black and white tile floor.
She was like the texture artist for a long time.
What a badass, doing all of that by yourself,
it's just
holy.
An overwhelming amount of work.
Originally, I was hand painting all of the textures.
Hand
and you can really see
painting?
a shift in some of them where they go from hand painted to photo reference. The photo references are much, much better. So I was all over Seattle, Harbor Island, Gasworks Park, getting rusty metal things. What can I get good pictures of that is vaguely industrial and interesting to look at? And then how can we use this?
Whoa, there was, okay, stag beetle kinda?
Box cars, and I don't know how many hallways in Half-Life.
I thought they were manta rays.
Car kind of thing. The Kirkland Costco. Lot of time in
very
the Kirkland
Costco coded.
Getting
for sure.
Packages of, I don't know why I needed snacks or something.
That's so funny. I can't believe she had to do all of that. Wasn't fun.
The first year was all about opportunity, and it wasn't quite as focused. We were finding our footing.
We were getting into the 3 months before supposedly shipping in '97, and it's like, this isn't gelling. This is really not good. This is like, quick knockoff, cash grab, stupid, and let's not do that. There was a lot of disconnect between what all of the different groups were doing, what engineering
These head crabs look awful.
What animation was doing.
They look like camel humps.
Had no plans to get in the game because nobody else was assigned to work on
Hold
them,
on,
and we had a bunch of levels that what's supposed to.
I want to talk about this before I get going. It keeps going. Dude, the monsters, it's kind of tragic. I really liked some of those monster designs, and I'm kind of curious what they mean they couldn't find a good place to put the alpha hound eye or whatever. Dude, I think that'd be so cool to have like a pack of hound eyes that are being like led by an alpha or something. The chub toad and like the bat, I forgot the bat's name. They all look awesome. And I feel like, again, I really like the Zen biology and like the Zen creatures. And I would love to have seen the chub toad like gameplay idea is really cool. Like you could have like a really infested area, and instead of you having to fight anything, you just throw a toad and distract them, kind of thing. Man, that's a shame. It's like, again, I wish we see more of Zen in Half-Life 2. Alex did it, and I think the lightning dogs were a great addition. I thought they were a really fun gameplay addition, but they were almost like mini bosses in a way. So I think it'd be cool to have like some more just chump monsters, or some more variety. And I feel like that's an issue with Half-Life 2 in general. Is like, I think there's not as much enemy variety as I would have liked to see. Again, like a very minor complaint considering how good and fun the game is, but just a minor point. And man, like I love that, because back then in '98 or something, people weren't using like Google to look up photo references. She had to actually like go out there, just take pictures and do stuff. That's really cool. All right, and then the game just wasn't fun, so they had to That's a pretty big problem, so I'm glad they addressed it.
They go in here, oh, I don't know, everybody's going to do a bunch of stuff. And like, no, that doesn't work that way.
So here we were, all these people doing all these cool things, and just everything's just this random collection of, oh, here's a cool moment and a cool this, and and then it's gone, and oh, now on to the next thing. Because the way we were building the game was every level designer was kind of his own silo, his own universe. And I think that just grew out of our
that makes sense.
Developer roots, but it wasn't cohesive, and it certainly didn't have a strategy for like maximizing any of that stuff.
You must have been in the meeting when we reviewed all the levels. It was like the first time everybody piled into a room,
right? And
Gabe had his crazy Hellraiser chair with the beautiful Mac monitor, and we played for 2 days. He played everyone's levels. But I remember one moment he turned around. He was like this with his hair. He was going, "We're gonna fail. We're gonna fail. We're gonna fail. We're gonna fail. We're gonna fail." And I was just like, it blew me away. I was like, "Oh shit, this isn't good."
We were doing our best trying to make this game and the story, and we had a schedule from Sierra, and it was a tight schedule. And we told them like, we're not going to ship this, and we realized that you're not going to pay us to continue developing this, but we're going to do it anyway.
Late is just for a little while, suck is forever, right? We could try to force this thing out the door.
That's funny. That's a funny quote.
We want to be. That's not the people we want to be. That's not the relationship we want to have with our customers.
And so Kelly and I kind of sat down and sort of tried to take an inventory of all the cool stuff we had built, and why weren't we just, building more on top of that? And those discussions kind of led to us building this kind of design cabal process to try to give some cohesion to the game and kind of changing the way we were approaching it.
And so a cabal was a small group of people, multidisciplinary group. There's like an artists, level designers, engineers, and everything in that. And a small team that would write up a spec for a level. There was the arc that Mark had written, so we knew how that fit into the story.
And we got a small group of people together, and we started with the beginning, and we went through literally what map do we need to build to tell us the story we're going to have to tell, and then what does that connect to, and what's the next piece and the next piece.
The strongest and most influential thing that came out of them was, to me, the sketches, and they were really the visual meeting notes, right?
We came up with a formula for how that worked. We had a certain percentage of the time where you were fighting, a certain percentage of the time where you're exploring, a certain percentage of the time where you're solving puzzles.
Yeah.
And so we could apply that uniformly through the game, and that worked pretty well.
Yeah, you could definitely tell. I think, again, a lot of modern games now have a lot more fluidity, and I think for the most part cohesion. And you could definitely tell in Half-Life that it was very cohesive, I'll say that. But it was very much like there are three elements to the game, right? There is the gunfight aspect, there is the exploration, and then there's the puzzle. I wouldn't call it formulaic, but it was definitely like, okay, these are the three sections of how the game plays. So it's cool to see that that's kind of how they fitted that in. And I think definitely the idea of the sketch and the facility makes a lot of sense, right? Because when you have all these people making their own levels, like how does that tie together? It's like, how did Jim Bob created, a level where this guy's fighting in like a freezer, and then Bob Jim created a level where you're fighting in like a furnace, and it's like, well, how the hell does that connect? So I think it makes sense that they have to like, okay, you know what? Let's go back to the drawing board. Like, let's actually map out like the process, like what's going, like how is this connecting to this, and then you have like the story arcs and everything. Even though the story was pretty minimal in the game, you still have to have like, okay, Gordon causes the resonance cascade. Well, Gordon doesn't, but you get what I mean. The resonance cascade happens. Then he has to find his way from here to here for this reason, and then from here to here for this reason. And now let's map out how that visually looks in the facility, etc. That's really cool. Okay. Also, like being late is like for a little while and suck is forever is a funny quote to me, because I think while I kind of get the idea behind that, there's a point where it's like, how do you define a little while? Because I can definitely get the aspect of like, well, if you want it to be perfect and not suck forever, like is 20 years a little while? Is 25 years a little while? Like, at one point do you say, maybe we can't make perfection, or we can't define what perfection is, so we should just release something or whatever? I think that's a big issue that a lot of art, like creatives, have, is where they're so obsessed with making something like in their own mind perfect that they can never get something finished. Again, and I think that's a pretty valid critique for Valve in terms of being like, maybe you could have, Half-Life Alyx was an incredible experience, but was it worth 20 years? I mean, maybe for some people. And for me, again, like, I don't have like a huge personal connection to Half-Life. So for me, I'm like, I could have done with a Half-Life episode 3. Like maybe a couple of years later. I don't know. Again, this is where it's more subjective and up to debate, but it's an interesting quote because, again, it definitely tells you like how they were viewing it. Like, just make it better. Like, don't release something bad. It's okay to be late. But then at what point... I assume they had to get something done eventually, right? Because this is a small company. But now that Valve has all the money they'd ever need, when are they going to ever have the pressure to release something, right? Anyway, let's keep going. All right, just took a small break, changed the lighting. Let's keep going.
Good morning, and welcome to the Black Mesa Transit System. This automated train
We
is
are
provided
recording?
for the
Okay.
security and convenience of the Black Mesa Research
This intro was
Facility
really
personnel.
cool.
The whole opening of the game was specifically a reaction to how all the other first-person shooters were, whether they had cutscenes or not. Like, sometimes, like, they would just open without a cutscene, but, you're standing in a room with a gun and there's a thing attacking you. So we could look at examples of all that, and I think there was expectation that that's what Half-Life had to do because every other game was doing it.
I can tell you the number of people who started up the game, were staring at it, and then accidentally bumped their mouse and realized this is live.
Yeah.
That's
And
interesting.
As simple as that sounds, it was mind-blowing for so many people because it was too much going on. This isn't real time. This is a recording,
That was sort of the way we, stumbled
That's
through
awesome.
a lot of the new narrative tricks. Was like, well, what can we do that you could do this in a movie or a story, but nobody's doing this in first-person shooters.
You're this anonymous scientist and you're riding on this train into work and rolled the credits at the beginning. It was kind of like a cinematic experience.
Yeah,
almost.
very
I don't think
cinematic.
it's really gone down that road. It's so funny to look at it now because it's so primitive.
Yeah.
At the time, it felt like you were really in this Black Mesa world.
But at the time, yeah, exactly. Like, now we can look back on it and it feels primitive, but it's really not.
Survived from the first year. So a lot of that geometry was from that first version of the game, but in a very minimal way, right? Just the basic style of some of the hallways, the curved corners in the hallways, things like that. They more became sort of like Lego pieces that John could use and stitch together and extrude. And I know Brett did a lot of the raw geometry from pre-disaster, and then John did most of the work to ship it, and then the post and the train ride was all.
Wow.
I think.
The Sector C, so those are heavily influenced by NASA.
Yeah,
control
definitely. Makes sense.
With my favorite green hammerite, really influenced a lot of like we started with the kind of the consoles. I'm trying to remember, and then there was just lots of hallways and people were getting lost, and I did the color stripes to help people follow them places.
That's smart.
One of the things that was actually super exciting was how quotidian a lot of it really was. The
That's all right.
lunchroom with the mic.
What does quotidian mean? Well, let's look it up. Quotidian. I've never heard that word before. Of or occurring every day. Daily. Okay, there you go. That's a really useful word to use, honestly, quotidian. Well, let's keep going.
Microwave. You press the button and it would go splat.
My God, what are you doing?
Yeah, all this work so you can start a microwave and blow up some soup, which was a reference to real life, because that happened regularly. Like, we regularly accidentally blew up.
Regularly.
There were a few people who were
Quotidianly.
just, challenged with kitchen appliances, And at one point we had a company fire.
Wow.
We had a lot of things going on in that kitchen.
It's like a uni dorm room.
Real kind of eloquence that in the late 90s, in a world where everything was so over the top, but we still got to go on flights of fancy.
Welcome to the HEV Mark IV.
I think like a super pivotal moment for me was when we came in this one morning and we saw the test chamber sequence that Kelly and John Guthrie and Wedge was in that office, and Dario Driller, they were all in this corner dark office where so much cool stuff happened. But so Kelly and John stayed up all night and did the test chamber sequence, and it's pretty much like the one we shipped.
I mean, that was a lot of what went on in that room that we called the submarine. It was just
the submarine.
Improvisation, just what can we do to solve this problem? How do we connect what's happening before to what's happening after? This needs to be somehow important, but we just don't know what to do. John and I talked about it. I went home that night and I sort of sketched out maybe we could do something cinematic. We'll take the camera away, we'll turn the lights off, we'll do sounds, we'll just throw everything we can at it. We built that basically that day. It was just a sort of a one-day throw it together. That's how fast we were moving.
They had audio, right? We had
yeah, it's like the heartbeat and the breathing, all that stuff was in there. And I played through it and it was like, damn, I have not seen this in any medium, in anything before, experienced something like this, where this immersive experience of this actually happening like this. And at that point, it's like, okay, I see what it is we're doing. And it's this kind of immersive, unbroken experience that happens to you, the player. And then that was this key principle about how, we never take you out of that role.
Personally, the difference between before the disaster sequence and after the disaster sequence, I felt we really I had an understanding that this product was going to be special, or it was going to be possible, it was going to be tied together. Whereas before that, there was a lot of really good stuff and a lot of little things all disconnected. But you guys managed to tie two very different parts of the game together really well. And I thought, okay, now I feel like we're on a track for finishing this product. To me, it shifted my brain to have a lot of confidence that this product's coming together rather than just generating a lot of content that exists independently of other content.
One of the ways we were funding our development was we sold a preview copy of Half-Life to a video card company, I forget which one. And so they had in their contract that we had to deliver it to them by a certain date. And we got like the first 3 levels done for them. It was really a good milestone for us, just from working as a company, because hey, there was a deliverable. We got it done, and we shipped it off to them. And then I swear the next day it leaked.
What?
And
How?
I was just livid at first, which was stupid. But I was just like, I can't believe you guys let this get out. Like, this wasn't us, And then it turned into something amazing where people started playing it. And it was all over, and we started, seeing it, online, what people were thinking about it. And I forget which magazine who said, usually we don't review, beta software. But
wow.
they reviewed it.
Awesome. Like it kind of became pretty big just off of a leak. That's crazy.
It was an outside validation of what we were trying to do, that it was the right thing.
God, I hated that segment. God, I hated that segment.
Already they were kind of like the vowels of weapons you put into first person. You got to have a shotgun. And there's obviously a pistol,
exactly. There's a few weapons you just need to have in a shooter.
Make you struggle and you drive you to get another weapon.
Yep.
That was a lesson in how to make all of your weapons as orthogonal as possible. So
okay.
Each one did something completely.
Well, now we're looking up what orthogonal means. I mean, again, this guy has got a good vocabulary. Orthogonal, of or involving right angles, statistically independent. So he wanted to make things, unique, I guess. Orthogonal. Okay. Very educational documentary here.
Different. All of the crazy weapons, those are my fault. So I did like the rocket launcher and the Gauss gun and the snarks.
Dude, the snarks are so epic.
I like snarks.
Oh man.
Snarks
Yeah,
always make me
exactly.
laugh. It's just
They're
always
funny.
to watch people run away from the snarks.
The squeak grenade.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
called the
that's
snark, but
Yeah, yeah.
I wanted something, little creature that you could bring up and hold, and you could throw it out, and it would just start running. Because people were camping, and everybody hated campers
Yeah.
at that point.
Yeah.
So you wanted the anti-camp weapon. But it was kind of, you could literally find a little hidey hole and just sit out there and just throw out 30 of them. And they're all over the map. I had a cat. And you'd sit there, you do your finger blue. Yeah, you do your finger towards him, and he'd get mad at you and he'd swat. So that was the inspiration for that particular animation. And then the other, that big alien creature with the, we needed some kind of alien weapon. Drew that one, built that one, animated that one, but that was also another one that was.
Dude, the bee
You could
cannon.
get in a corner and just shoot them in the air because the hornets would track.
Fuck the hornets.
I think that was the biggest thrill, is brainstorming these with your crew, making them, building them, putting them in the game, and then playing with them, and then they're fun.
So there's sort of a
True.
trope of having a melee weapon. I think it was Steve Bond and Ken Birdwell and I were saying we wanted a device where the world was reacting to you. It really goes back to that theory of fun. But we were just running around like idiots, smacking the wall. It's an odd thing to know in retrospect, but at the time it felt profoundly satisfying to be able to smack walls. And that was just an example of how that fairly abstract notion of what fun was ended up translating into a set of decisions that were really visceral. When you're going around whacking a wall, a crowbar is an obvious thing to whack the wall with.
A single person again, yeah. DSP reverb effects. DSP.
If the sound could let you know what's going to happen, that's really makes it powerful. So we're always on the lookout for that. In
Kelly
design,
Bailey, yeah,
in
this
monster
guy
design,
has some amazing
communicating,
soundtracks in the
because
games.
the AI is often hidden from the player. So we use the sound to broadcast the internal state of the AI. You know, soldiers, they tell you, I'm injured, I'm going to throw a grenade,
Yeah.
I'm taking cover. You know, they are broadcasting as constantly as they can what's about to happen. So it was really important to try to keep those states distinct so that as you play the game, you're actually, whether you're aware of it or not, you're starting to be able to tell what's about to
Yeah, a lot
happen.
of sound cues. For me, it was hard to tell, to be honest, but I get the idea.
So he could do sounds, but he also decided he was going to write the sound engine, and then he wrote the soundtrack. And he never
Dude,
wrote
his-
a soundtrack
wow, his
before. He wrote the
soundtracks are
whole,
dope.
Soundtrack for the game, and it won an award. And
Yeah,
it was
like
crazy.
legitimately
There
very,
just weren't that many of
very
us.
good.
You know, I had a little bit of a background playing music. I understood the sound engine really well, so it was really easy for me to just hook sounds in, and I understood enough about the level design side that I could kind of connect those things a little bit. The sounds could come from anywhere, and then I just heavily modified them. Usually those are animal sounds, reversing, changing the pitch.
I wonder what he did for the
chopping
head
them up,
crabs.
rearranging
Oh,
them.
there you go.
Head crabs
Rats.
were rats. The little squeaky, yeah, that's a rat slowed way down. and
It
then
sounds like
reversed.
someone crying a little bit or something, but they're just rat noises that are just
Yeah, the DSP
have some
stuff
effects on
was
them.
Another cool thing that Kelly built. When you got an event, it sounded like you were an event, and that wasn't really happening, I guess, at least in Quake and other games.
Oh, wow.
Back then.
Okay, did not know that. A lot of stuff you would never even think about, right? Like, I didn't even know there, like, the reverb effects were a thing.
Silos, these cavernous spaces. The day they had their own echoey DSP, it made an enormous difference, right? You believed the space.
Yeah, we're so used to it now. I imagine when you first heard that kind of, like, audio effect, it was pretty mind-blowing.
Kelly tells me, oh God, Chuck Jones asked him if the characters could speak and have their mouths move. And Kelly said, that's super easy. I could just look at the audio and see if they're talking and do that. But like getting their mouth to move is stupid, he says to me. And I look, Chuck Jones told me the same thing. I told him making the mouths move was super trivially easy, but knowing when they're talking and knowing how to follow the envelope of the speech would be impossible. And Kelly and I just both looked at each other and like, oh. And so I went back to my office and he went back to his office. And I think within an hour, the characters were talking and the
Cool.
mouths were moving. And it was only because we sat there at lunch bitching about an animator who was 100% right.
Why are you leaving?
Both of them like, oh, it's got to be so hard. No, it isn't that hard.
When they're next to each other, one scientist will occasionally play a question, and the other one will give him an answer. And it's not a script, you know. It just might be. It might not always make sense.
Okay.
I'm rather looking forward to this analysis, aren't you? I don't think so.
That's funny. Okay, so they just have a list of questions and a list of answers, and maybe they match or not.
When we first added the ability for scientists to respond to the player and other things in the environment, I would call them response rules. The first time that went in, they came flying down the elevator.
The game is low-key just like comedy too.
And then they explode into a pile of ribs at the bottom.
There's horror and then there's comedy.
So closely designed for that creature that because the creature survived, the levels survived along with it. Yeah, there's
Makes
this
sense.
sort of central circular thing where you have to rotate the train and you have to kill the gargantua first because he was always defending the way out. And then you have to go to like another area which looks very much like it was designed for Quake because pretty much.
Yeah, okay. Definitely looked like a FPS arena kind of thing.
You have to drain the generator and then you can switch the power on and then you can take the train out. Yeah, I remember him being totally central to this whole thing. And then, well, how do we block the player? Which is, I mean, that's pretty much like design point number one for all level design. Okay, well, how do we prevent the player from just walking straight out through the exit? And you design backwards from there.
In the first year, we built a lot of world space, a lot of track as we call it, and the programmers would try to fit the AI into the existing maps. What we did the second year was we built the AI in very constrained environments that showcase the AI. Let's make the ideal space for the AI and then give that to the level designers to incorporate those elements into their map so that it worked better and was more interesting. That Gargantua was an example of that. And the grunts especially.
Yeah, we had the...
So this is something you guys can maybe correct me on, and we might get some answers in the Half-Life 2 documentary. But a lot of people told me that in comments that the Combine AI is actually very complex, or like is like pretty good. But because of the map size of Half-Life 2, you can't really see that being displayed. Because I personally found the Combine to be not particularly impressive when it came to AI, even for the age of the game, while I was very impressed in Half-Life 1. So I'm curious if they followed that same principle, or maybe they tried other stuff or did different things. You guys can again correct me, or maybe we'll find out in the documentary. But I'm not sure how true that those comments are about, the AI being quite sophisticated, but not being particularly well designed for the more claustrophobic environments that we see in Half-Life 2, but who knows? Here they intentionally did it. They made it even more compact for these AI to really that's pretty cool.
The AI that Steve had been working on, and he had designed all these interesting encounters with them just in his test map, and so he had them up high and down low, and so basically we just sort of re-leveraged that. So, okay, let's start with the player comes in low, and there's a Marine on the same level, and then the next one they're up high, and then they come running down, because it was really neat to see them retreat. They'd try to run back up the stairs and try to flank you from another side.
So Steve Bond, like I mentioned earlier, was this really young guy who had been making mods in Quake C, really the designer for so much of the AI. I mean, all the stuff that's good about the soldiers, the grunts you fight in Half-Life.
Yeah, we had a little bit of a language we could sort of use to say, this is a place they can climb. This is a place they can jump to. This is a good place to hide. These are good places to go in general, or interesting places. So, the AI had a little bit of help.
Okay, makes sense.
We were trying to build something that utilized, the train technology that Jay was working on. And we thought, well, let's give the player something that they can control, but in a limited way. We couldn't do vehicles like you see in Half-Life 2. So we did the most constrained vehicle we could think of, which was the
I
train.
like this chapter. A lot of people didn't, but
so
I quite like this.
These poor people walking down these tunnels.
Oh, is that why you electrified the
And
rail?
and the rails were, that was part of the
Kept
feedback
dying from that.
Part of the feedback was, well, you can just bypass all that, so we made the rails electric. It's like, well, maybe that'll teach them to use the train with them.
Makes
but
sense.
the basic idea was, let's explore that, and then also reveal some of the hidden deep parts of the base, the abandoned areas where you might get a lot more of the Zen creatures. We had designed some of the ones that didn't make it into the game to appear there, bats that would dive bomb you and while you're on the train. Yeah, Stuka bats. And then we also tried hard to not make it feel like it was the super linear thing, so we tried to give little branches, and so there were some challenges there.
Well, there was a really good sketch that Kelly Bailey made, which basically charted surface tension, and it was pretty extensive. Like, it went through the cliffside, and it went through areas where tanks were, and like a lot of soldier holdouts. Yeah, it even went through the desert with the cactuses and the helicopters, and then across a dam. It was pretty extensive. Yeah, when I saw that sketch, I was so motivated to just start building.
Crazy that Kelly Bailey, the musician, drew that.
Geometry, and it seems like a lot of it
Fascinating.
stuck in some way or another, which is really amazing. I did the dam, which was funny. I just did that in a day. Like, it was like about 4 or 5 hours. I did a Hoover Dam thing because I like the Hoover Dam.
I saw a concept
4 or 5 hours, wow.
I think Harry Teasley built that render of the skybox. Yes. And I just thought, holy crap, this is perfect for Vertigo. Like, whatever we do here, we have to play on Vertigo and like narrow little edges and places you would like to normally dodge a grenade that you can't.
This segment was cool.
That's the moment. That's really the big part of that.
Yeah, the
level,
reveal.
And the play is kind of supports it after.
Yeah, it does.
The helicopter comes in, you're fighting the helicopter.
Helicopter bugged out in my playthrough, and it just blew itself up, unfortunately. It would have been cool to fight the thing on the ledge, on the cliffside.
First of all, I had a bunch of textures, and then every time I made new ones, whoever was working on the new levels would be like, oh, fresh textures, I'm going to use those. Somebody making another level would start using them, and I was like, no, this is chaos. we need to restrict this. So I started naming the texture sets by the level that they were made for. I was trying to enforce some sort of like visual cohesion, and so that really ended up working.
There was one level I did, it was the introduction of the bounce pads, the alien bounce pads in the real world. Because, story-wise, like, okay, you're getting closer to hitting the alien world. So I was, well, let's get a little bit of alien world infection into the real world. So I had done it just as a visual thing. John Guthrie made it 10 times better. And that's actually where he found the photo of my daughter, because I didn't put my daughter in Gordon's locker. I hid her in like this destroyed office someplace.
Oh, okay.
As a little Easter egg for myself. And John went and put my daughter's photo in Gordon's locker, which I think was a good decision.
Okay, at first it sounded a little bit creepy, and then if he already put it in the game, that's funny.
I still get questions about stuff that I spent 5 minutes on 25 years ago.
Yeah, I bet.
And people who've now thought about this for 25 years, and they're thinking that there's 25 years worth of development went into this. I'm like, on some level, when you start talking about lore, I'm like, well, there's Black Mesa. That was just a matter, we needed a name for something that was evocative.
In that entrance, when you get off the train and there's that lobby where there's a big map on it, and when we were making that map, that was fairly early on, I put a dot in New Mexico. And then that turned into, I think Mark saw that, he was like, oh, where is that? This is where we are. And then he named it Black Mesa.
Yeah.
That is a favorite thing of mine, actually. If you come up with a name for something, and it evokes something, then you don't have to write the whole story. It's because it's a conspiracy plot. Everybody knows more about it than you do, so you don't have to answer those questions. You just keep raising questions and make the mystery kind of thing.
Like dialogue came in later. Also, a lot of the scripted sequences came in later, and those helped to kind of sharpen the storytelling aspect of it, because, I mean, setting expectations to get up to the surface and then like, oh no, they're not here to help us.
The whole thing about diegetic writing, right? Like keeping the exposition in the game instead of outside the game. I give a lot of credit to Mark.
After playtests, we'd realized that maybe you need more of a dialogue cue about something.
that's when we started to do like scientists who were literally pop up in a corner and go that way. There's a few of those that we stuck in.
Little
right at
quest
the end where we're
givers.
like, well, we get one more session with Hal. He can say, go down here, go around that corner.
Well, so much for the government. Their idea of containment is to kill everyone associated with the program. Judging from your hazard suit, I'd say you were part of what went wrong.
I knew Hal from San Francisco as an artist, cartoonist. He was also an animator and an actor in some science fiction movies. So when we got down to the wire, we did a bunch of voice casting and nothing was right. And I just kept thinking of Hal. And I finally just called him and said, Hal, I want you to at least talk to people here so they can hear your voice. And I got him on a speakerphone and I had a bunch of people.
He's got
in
a
my
good
office.
scientist voice.
I'm like, okay, Hal, everybody's here. And he's like, well, what would you like me to say? And everybody was like, this is him. This is the guy.
Why do we
They
all have to
wear these ridiculous ties.
Another interesting voice thing was the G-Man. So we liked Mike Shapiro's work. So we knew we wanted to use him, but we brought him in to do Barney and also the G-Man. So we did a take on all the G-Man lines with kind of a straight voice, and it was thinking that, okay, we have something safe, but we're not super excited about it, and give us something else. And he does this crazy lizard voice.
The border world, then, is in our control for the time being, thanks to you. Quite a nasty piece of work you managed over there. I am impressed.
And we took it back, and everybody just loved the crazy lizard voice, and so that's
He loses a little bit of the lizard in
I did.
HL2.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Nihilanth. Just imagine his head floating in space as a baby.
Yeah, I think this is where a lot of criticism goes towards Zen being rushed.
Gabe to either fire Ken or I quit. And Gabe just laughed at me.
Wow.
Correct response from Gabe.
Yeah. And I was like,
oh. Until Bill got there, I was the
That's
oldest guy
funny.
there. It was hard because, I had to go home in the evenings, whereas the young guys who just moved out from Florida or wherever, they did not have to go home in the evenings. I'd go home, see my kids. When they were in bed, I would come back down the hill to Valve. Nobody else I worked with had to get up to get their kids off to school in the morning, but I did.
You're wired to just take full advantage of the situation. You put everything into it. So when we say we worked 18-hour days, that's no exaggeration.
Yeah.
And not at all. I can edit all day. I can design all day. I don't have to worry about anything. Two guys from Microsoft start a game studio with a bunch of incredibly capable, with an incredible team. You're gonna push yourself harder than ever before.
I don't usually crunch real hard. I get it done in I come in, I work, I go home, and a lot of people were living really long hours. The classic. Well, I'll come in at 1 and then goof around for a while and then work late into the late at night. I was employee 17. There was a woman that was the kind of the office manager, and eventually Mona Lisa Guthrie came in at the desk. I was the only woman on the team.
Yeah, I bet.
I decided to become a baseball fan here after the birth of my first daughter, so she's the one in Gordon's locker, Isabel, but she's very special needs. She's 25 today. Cognitively, she's about 3 years old. So after her birth, in the middle of Half-Life production, it was really hard. It was really hard.
I imagine.
Because we were getting about 2 hours of sleep at a stretch.
Wow, these guys work hard.
A tube in her stomach every 2 hours. I had just a difficult time relating to the world when she was a baby.
Yeah.
I had a hard time just talking to people because I was just kind of tired and angry all the time. Yeah, my wife, she worked at Valve for a while. She did a bunch of textures for the game. Like I say, she did those soda machines. She did just a bunch of level textures. She textured Big Mama, the sort of boss creature. She textured him. But when Isabel arrived, she obviously had a lot of issues. So yachts had to stop working and stay with her at home. And it was the last year of Half-Life, and we pretty much crunched that whole year. So I was at work a lot. It was hard. It was definitely a hard year.
Holy crap, man. Like, that's insane. Zen.
Games have often had this thing where they're just a little too attached to Star Wars, Blade Runner, Alien.
Yes,
so
please.
It wasn't that hard to try to get people to go, let's think of something really...
Thank you. Thank you. This was great.
Go inside a huge alien organism and kill it or figure out how to turn it on or off or something like that. I didn't know we couldn't actually do that or what was involved.
What does it mean to have alien architecture or a planet that's biologically defining the structures in it, as opposed to what the tools were good at, which is making rectangles?
And then slowly it scaled back till it was more and more corridors, and that everybody was really good at.
People were finishing up stuff, and I was still working on Zen, because it was like it went through a lot of iteration, or at least we're trying to figure out what it was. Different people were taking swings at it, either in static concepts.
Weren't you under a bit of a timeline crunch for it as well?
Yeah, it was the end of the game.
Yeah.
I wanted to cut stuff out, and they're like, no, leave it in. I'm like, yeah, but I don't have any, there's nothing, I don't have any support for this.
Right.
And then after a lot of it was built, it's like, oh yeah, we're gonna change the gravity and give you a jump pack. That came later. And I was like, ah.
There's a lot of stuff, especially in Zen, where you're getting close to a first draft.
It makes sense. I think the vision for Zen was fantastic, but I think execution it struggled with.
Not going to Zen, but
the art concepts, exactly.
Concepts people did were so cool.
For the Zen textures, I was deeply inspired by electron microscope imagery, and we had so much of that regular structural texture material that I wanted to do something more organic.
Makes sense.
Insects as well. I think there's a lot of textures that were based on beetles. That was really fun, and incredibly challenging levels to make, because that editor was not friendly for organic shapes.
I built the little behaviors for the tree that hits you if you get too close, and the light stalk that kind of hides. But Ken did a bunch of AIs there, the floating controller guys.
And the flying guys were great, but you had to set up air nodes for them to travel properly. I prototyped a lot, and some of those prototypes were used in the final battle, I believe, and also for the Gonard, which I think Randy did.
We, at some point, have to stop polishing. At some point, we have to, like, it is what it is. And if the player hasn't had fun up until that point, well, then we failed. They're not going to get to that point, so who cares? It just has to finish, and it did.
Yeah, and there's always Half-Life 2 to win them back.
I love that sensation of being alone in an alien dimension, but the experience that people really liked in the game was scientists pop up and Barney pops up and you have companions and you have this feeling of companionship around you with all the other stuff that's going on. So a lot of people miss that, which
I like the idea of Zen.
If we had thought about the ending,
exactly,
we would have figured out some ways.
It just was rushed. It was a first draft, and it makes sense.
I remember coming back from downtown Cabo very drunk and then running to the beach, but didn't know there was like a 6-foot retaining wall there, so I just went right over. And then I was hurting so much I slept the night where I fell.
Wow.
I woke up the next morning.
I had never heard that
really
story.
Stiff neck.
It's crazy, bro.
I remember after we'd gone final on the game, I was home one morning, taking a shower, and my wife asked me, like, it's done. Is it any good? Is the game any fun? Like, I don't know. Like, I hope so.
I don't think it's exaggerating by saying if any one of the crew had disappeared for a month, we wouldn't have shipped. It didn't matter who they were. Everybody was mission critical.
My inspiration from Valve, what I really took away with me was that the thing that is most important to me is, what are we making? Coming in as a texture artist, you don't have a lot of expectation that you're going to get to influence that. And I was able to have quite a bit of influence on the what.
It was so fun to work with the people who were making Half-Life. The collection of people were diverse, at least like in their professional backgrounds, was kind of all over the place. And so figuring out how to work with all those people, but also just the fact that we had hired really stellar people who were good at collaborating, like they're conscientious people, deeply passionate about what they wanted to create. That just was a recipe for a professionally like really good time.
It seems to me that one of the things that good games do is make 2 games worth of stuff and then throw away the bad game. And fortunately,
that's a funny. I didn't know that. That's a funny perspective.
In fact, stopped by Gabe and Mike, you know, Valve could afford to do that.
I always have absolutely nothing interesting to say when people say, "Would you reflect on your legacy?" Like, I really don't look back a whole lot. I'm always excited by the future, right? So, to me, it's like I can look back at the things we did, but to me, they're just sort of like the stepping stones to what we're going to be able to do in the future. That's just how I'm wired, right?
Cool. I'm assuming, yeah, this is the multiplayer. This turned into like Counter-Strike, right? Yeah, okay, yeah, this is Counter-Strike now. I was never a Counter-Strike guy, more of a Call of Duty guy. Halo. Dude, Opposing Force was awesome. I actually like Blue Shift too. Oh, is that it? Okay. Wow, that was quite interesting. I thought there might be more about the whole multiplayer sections and how that evolved. But no, I thought that was really interesting. And I really liked hearing kind of perspective. And again, it's, yeah, one of those like, not quite lightning in a bottle, because obviously we saw Half-Life 2 and like Valve has created so many fantastic games. But, you know, they just kind of got a great team together and clearly had some really good leadership as well, right? So, man, I've already kind of said what I wanted to say. Like, definitely gives you a perspective, really makes you kind of appreciate, and I think also like makes sense for how you get a game like Half-Life, where you have so much creativity and kind of this leadership and like these resources that allow you to kind of explore that creativity and kind of integrate that in a very unique way that it's hard to find nowadays with how like much industry there is, and how, you know, there's more bureaucracy, there's more like how much money can we invest. There's a lot more to the ecosystem of game development, so that will always like limit creativity to some level. And I think obviously there's a reason why the best games that are coming out are not from AAA studios anymore, right? It's typically a lot of indie devs or like smaller teams, because eventually it just becomes bloated. And so like this kind of creativity or like kind of visionary kind of genre defining things we don't really see as much anymore as we kind of define like how gaming is. So it's really interesting to see how that started from the get-go. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It was a good time. I really enjoyed it. I saw that the Half-Life 2 one is like 2 hours. So I don't know if I'll split that up into episodes. I'm gonna probably release this in the next day or two, and then I'll get feedback. If there's not a lot of interest, or if you guys have like feedback for how I can record this, let me know, and then maybe I can make the second, like, you know, Half-Life 2 documentary, you know, maybe a little bit better in some ways, but I'm still gonna talk a lot, right? Like, I don't think you guys want me to just watch the documentary and not say anything, so I'm gonna give my thoughts. But damn, dude, I actually might play Half-Life again. It kind of got me feeling, I've been hankering for some Half-Life. Maybe not on hard mode, but we'll see. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you again soon.